Who is undoubtedly the most dangerous person you know? My mom has totaled around 5 cars. She's a terrible driver. Should NT even be on the road? If she's driving ill, say I'll take my car and meet you there. My dad eats mushrooms from his backyard. And hoses out his toaster and hangs it by the cord on the washing line to dry. My parents moved into a neighborhood with a truck driver as a neighbor. When they finally met him, he drove all the time. They found out his wife had killed herself and his son had been in jail, prison on and off since he was a minor. Trucker dude was super rough around the edges, but had acquired quite a bit of wealth over his career of hard work. My parents started having him over for dinners and became pretty good friends. He didn't like to talk about his son and got real grumpy when his name came up. Dad wasn't the direct problem. His son got released from prison and came back home on a last chance deal with his dad. He was in rehab. He was helpful and helping my parents with projects and chores. They started trusting the guy. He seemed like things were going well in his life for once. I even met the fuck up and agreed he was a nice kid with a bad life. He was older than me and I still say kid lol. Well, Dad called my parent and told them he had been missing for 2 nights and that's not a good sign. Turns out he went on a bender. Beat the living shit out of his girlfriend in a Home Depot parking lot. And evaded a cop on his way out. He started calling my parents with burner phones asking if he could come over. The answer was a hard no. He then escalated to he was gonna roll up with his crew and take their shit while they slept. That escalated things even more. He got caught the next day at a trap house and arrested with an illegal handgun. Fucker was locked in for 7 years and released on good behavior. Nobody knows where he is at. His dad died a few years back. They think they saw him multiple times sitting outside of his old house late at night. That's the scariest person I know. Edit to add. My parents did nothing but feed him and offer advice when he needed it. Just a nice old couple. Unpredictable people that flip on a switch scare me. A nurse I have worked with once. She completely stepped over boundaries. Disconnected a PICC line without informing me, the PICC-trained nurse. Didn't wear gloves or wash her hands. Couldn't take criticism or couldn't be taught about the error of her clinical judgment. Instead shouted at myself, the patient and other staff. Didn't come back, so she's probably moved on to another area. The patient? That was her last go at palliative chemo to give her some more months of quality time with her children. The PICC blocked. They didn't give her another one. That nurse contributed to that woman having less time with her family. I will never forgive her. My neighbor Frank is from Sicily. He smokes in the supermarket. Drives like a nutcase. Can swear in 3 languages. He's 80 years old and he was drinking limoncello on his roof this morning. One of my favorite people. Former high school classmate who became a cop and started a pedophilia ring. Eventually crossing multiple state lines and trading services for video game systems. All while abusing neighborhood children. May he rot in the federal penitentiary that currently houses his nasty ass. My father. A wife-beating criminal. Cocaine addict. Full of steroids and anger issues. He showed up at my little sister's house last January and threatened her for money. But the dangerous part is that he's scary smart. Gotta give credit where credit is due. That guy is not stupid and that's what makes him all the more dangerous. There's very few people I'm genuinely afraid of. But he's one of them. Me. I single-handedly have the power to completely upend my life at a moment's notice and run it into the ground. There isn't a single other person in the world that can do that. Gary from work. Guy is a nutcase. My Bill's best friend who works for the government. He's not allowed to tell us what he does and all we know he leaves for a couple of weeks at a time every few months. Speaks several languages and looks like he's cut out of wood. There was one time where he came over to a party I was having and I'd set up some VR games for people to try. There was a game where zombies attack you from all sides and it's all about keeping your head on a swivel and headshots. I don't remember the specifics. But none of us had gotten past level 2 or 3. He made it to something like 30 without breaking a sweat. It was his first time playing that game and he hasn't gamed since SNES days. Everyone that saw him play, move that day agrees he's probably not working in IT. Edit. I had no idea this would get this much attention, so let me clarify some things. I've never asked him what he does. I just heard. He can't talk about it, so I don't bring it up. I'm not saying he's Jason Bourne. All I know is that he was in the army, and I think I remember someone mentioning he went to ranger school. His job sends him all over the world. In the time that I've known him, about 5 years. He's lived in the UK, Philippines and Africa. This one is from a completely personal point of view. But he definitely has a, I'm not going to fuck with that guy, vibe. He's a super nice guy that's never shown an ounce of aggression. But I think if you asked him during dinner how many people are in the booth 3 tables over, he's be able to tell you without looking. My granddad. When he was alive, he was a sweet, humble old man who loved gardening, but oh my god, I do not know who allowed him to keep driving. He was 84 with arthritis. Plus he was deaf and almost blind. But he insisted on still driving. One time he parked his car on a tram track with my sister inside it. He is the sole reason I think there should be an age limit on driving licenses. Either the guy who got busted diddling preschoolers or the guy who tried to kidnap a high school girl at gunpoint because she called him creepy while he was high on something. I worked with a small man Caillou. He was a Gurkha. You do not fuck with a Gurkha. Someone triggered some sort of defense response in him by accident. Guy saw some horrific stuff in his past, and he basically flipped a guy twice his size to the ground in an instant and was ready to continue until he snapped out of it. Part of their traditions is if they draw their knife they have to draw blood. They are also allowed their knife in most situations due to it being a religious item. He was awoken in the middle of the night, marched out and shown horrifying things to condition him. They really are like something out of Dune, and in my opinion one of the closest things to a honor-based warrior guild tradition you see in media. However, to this day he is the nicest man I have met in my entire life. When I quit that job I almost could have been in tears, as that man was the only reason I enjoyed going to work. Babies in that stage of crawling and almost walking. Those nutcases try to eat electricity. I used to work for different pot farms out in Northern California. I got a job working for some guys another friend was working for. They were brothers. I worked for the one brother mostly on his farm. He pretended to be a peace and love hippie guy who went to music festivals and stuff. The other brother, it turns out, was a kind of mob boss for the Bulgarian mob. I thought they were just pot growers, which was semi-legal at the time. It turns out they had their hands in all sorts of things, including sex trafficking. I had to nope the fuck out of that situation when I found out what was really going on. It was wild too, because everyone I met came off as pretty nice. I never suspected them of being full-on gangsters. They didn't want to pay me when I quit, and I almost got mauled by their massive pit, mastiff dog. I was pretty naive and highly stoned back then. My brother-in-law. He's a chronic alcoholic with a narcissistic personality and violent tendencies. He has assaulted each of his siblings and sexually assaulted his ex-wife and little sister. He's been enabled and taught to be a victim his whole life. I'm terrified of him, but he's someone you never want to show fear or weakness. The list goes on. I was in a mental health, psychiatric, state hospital, and the unit I was on was an admissions unit, and maybe 4 or 5 out of 22 had no criminal record. I wasn't one with a record. A murderer, rapist, abuser. It goes on. But the most dangerous? The nicest woman. Very religious. Kind. Sweet. She killed her mom. To her words. She blacked out. She explained that every few years she just has a snap. She gets hospitalized. I talked a lot to her. She genuinely was a good person at heart with a terrible past. There's also this guy. Only a few years older than me. With very violent tendencies. You never push someone to why they are in any setting. And I knew that from prior hospitalizations. Mostly everyone will say why they are there. But him? Nope. He was violent with a cop. Had a disdain for them. He told me that. Got physical with his family. And also threatened a cop with a weapon. He had mental health issues. No doubt about it. But he had no remorse for any of it. But to be honest, he never seemed to think any of what he did was wrong. With an outwardly violent person, you can expect an outburst. But with someone who isn't, yet has had such past episodes? Absolutely. That scares me. Edit. Added some more info. I worked at Bullfrog Spas, a hot tub manufacturer, for a short period some years ago, and they employed good behavior prisoners because the prison was next door to the factory. There were a few guards around at all times, but we worked closely together and always got to know the inmates in our areas. Of course, people would ask them what they were in for. Variety of stuff such as failed hired hitman, robbery, etc. So probably them or my mother. To be honest though, they were super fun, cool to work with. Highly recommend. They weren't allowed certain luxuries but had water flasks, so sometimes on factory breaks I'd ask them if they wanted anything, candy, snacks, soda, and put it in the flask for them to enjoy when out of sight of the guards walking around. They appreciated it quite a lot, haha. My granddad. He took down 47 German aeroplanes during the war. Worst mechanic the Luftwaffe ever had. The 7-foot shadow man that periodically stands in my doorframe at night seems pretty iffy, to be honest. My uncle. He's a paranoid schizophrenic but also very aggressive, and he would often instigate fights. Sometimes these fights would be against multiple people, and there were a few times I watched him beat up 3 and 4 people at once. Including one time where someone was hitting him with a bat. He always thought he was being threatened, and his fight or flight response always chose fight, so his adrenaline could turn on at the drop of a hat. He isn't a huge man, but I've seen him do some insane physical things. The one instance that really stands out was when the cops were called on our house due to him causing a domestic disturbance. This was when he was only starting to succumb to his illness, so he still had his wits about him much of the time. So when he opened the door and the cops asked to come inside, he said, "No." They didn't have a warrant, and from what I remember and from what I now know about the law, there wasn't visible evidence of probable cause. But the cops tried to push their way past him into the house anyway. He didn't resist, but they couldn't move him back, so they decided they were just going to arrest him. The cop at the top of the steps tried to cuff him, and they tumbled down the steps. When they got up, my uncle attacked, and I watched as he beat the shit out of 4 cops for about 10 minutes until they finally subdued him. And by subdued I mean they pepper sprayed him right away. Were beating on him with nightsticks the whole time, and they had to tase him at least twice. Those cops were fucked up by the end of it. He basically threw the smaller female cop across the street at one point. He spent a few nights in jail and eventually got probation. I don't know all the specifics of how he avoided real jail time. I was only like 9 years old when this happened and did my best to not question him about anything for self-preservation reasons. I assume it's because they tried to enter the home and arrest him without a warrant or probable cause. Or potentially because the one cop put their hands on him first, causing them to fall down the steps. But I don't really know. I also don't know why they didn't shoot him in the moment. I assume it's because there was a little kid watching in the doorway. For other reasons I won't go into, he eventually became my primary caregiver until I turned 18, and his schizophrenia only got worse. Childhood was fun. Probably my best friend in high school. Though he's more of a danger to himself than anyone else. Years ago I would have said a guy the first knew who was kind of like a low-level crime boss of sorts. That was until he was killed. Nowadays I'd probably say a bodybuilder I know who also does some amateur MMA stuff. I got close with a person I met for an online hookup. After 6 months he opens up to me about how he has multiple murderous thoughts and he's in therapy for it. Told me how he used poisons in very creative ways on his bullies and got them extremely sick. I thanked him for opening up to me. Then slowly got too busy to hang out anymore. In the 80s, my father knew a family of brothers. They were well-connected people. The oldest didn't trust banks and only used cash. Rolls of notes as thick as your wrist. As a kid I got stuff for Christmas that fell of the back of a truck, new bikes, etc. If a car was stolen, it could easily be stripped for parts in hours, as one brother owned a scrapyard. My dad worked with them regularly and always got paid well, but never said too much about the work. Sociopaths in my former workplace. Trail of destroyed careers and lives in their wake. As one of them likes to say, namaste. I work with a shitty doctor. He seems kinda dangerous. There was a guy in high school who, the moment I saw, got this extremely bad vibes. Didn't look abnormal in his style. Very casual. But when we were waiting for a class to start, I noticed the way he reacted to something surprising someone else told him. It was forced. Not in like, oh poor you kinda, but like he had to learn how to react in different situations. Because he had no idea how feelings worked, equals no empathy whatsoever. At that moment, my head screamed that no. No. I am not going near that guy. He tried to talk to me from time to time. But I gave him a very cold shoulder. Because I didn't even want him to know I existed. The way he looked gives me shivers. His stare was so absent. No emotion ever. Turned out that guy is a known psychopath and narcissist. Have destroyed a couple of lives and is a minute away from prison. Never doubted my gut after that. Drunk driving Dirk. The guy who is everyone's friend. He always drives the car. Expensive cars, too. That's why people like him. He's their luxury chauffeur. He drives almost exclusively when he's drunk. If you point it out, you lose standing with the entire group of friends. I am not part of that group of friends. I called the cops on drunk driving Dirk once. Because I was there that time. He lost his driver's license and got a heavy fine. He kept driving. Over the years, he managed only to damage 3 cars, his own, and not anyone else. Not yet. Anyway, he drives drunk to do his shopping. To drive his friends around. Be the designated drunk driver. And anywhere else. Basically. He has no job and lives off of his parents' money. His cars are actually given to him by his wealthy, $30 million plus parents. Dirk is the person people suck up to for all the wrong reasons. DDD will, at some point, kill someone. And he'll be the villain. His enablers will speak shame of him and never visit him in prison or, just as likely, at his funeral. My grandfather, wonderful, kind and caring man, won a military cross for exceptional bravery for taking out 2 machine gun nests in WW2. He ran out of ammo and killed multiple enemies with a shovel by hand. Was quiet. Not boastful, but towards the end of his life talked about how easy it became to kill in the war, and he remembered the sound of an enemy's head coming off when he hit him with a shovel. Made me think how quiet and unassuming he was, but when necessary he was able to do that. My grandma. She got me drunk at 2. Tried to groom me. Tried to sell my mom for money. Is a raging alcoholic. Last year she was taking meds for her liver. You weren't allowed to drink alcohol on the meds. She did anyway. And her tongue would swell so she couldn't breathe. No worries. She would just use an EPI pen to fix that. This time it didn't work. So she drove 45 minutes. Drunk and on EPI to the doctor. She was admitted to the hospital and dried out. These are the mild stories. Edit. Dried. Not died. She is still kicking. Not as direct as many comments here, but I was briefly in business with a former high-ranking politician in my country. They weren't particularly malicious, but their arrogance and narcissism was matched only by their incompetence. It was terrifying that someone who I wouldn't trust to wipe their own ass used to play a significant role in running a G20 country. I know everyone thinks politicians are morons, but this was first-hand evidence of how fucked we must all be. My work boss. Can fire me any minute if I fuck up once, bruh. Guy the first used to hang out with in high school and a couple years after. Wound up killing his mom last November by trying to cut off her head. He did it in front of his 2 youngest siblings who were about 6 and 4. My BF's mother drives drunk all the time, so gonna go with her. A former boyfriend who was kicked out of the Mossad for enjoying his work too much. Some dude a family member of mine knows. They were work colleagues for over 25 years. The dude is a black belt in karate and a few other martial arts. He has a lazy eye and F***D up ears from all of the fists his face ate. He lit his ex's house on fire over her being a bit petty in the divorce. Beat up a neighbor over a parking dispute. And when the neighbor called the cops, he set their car on fire. He used to sell drugs. But like, in an organized professional way. He didn't need anyone's help enforcing payment. He was his own enforcer. He was active in a truck drivers union and would routinely scare the shit out of union busters and nasty supervisors. He's the only one people were told to stay clear from. Bloke owns multiple large houses and cottages. Is over 60 years old. He still will, for about $200, deliver a pizza to someone for friends in need. That's code word for breaking someone's leg or ing up their shit for $200. He'll ring at people's place, holding a pizza for them to open up. When they do, he unleashes a world of pain and just leaves whatever message was ordered to be left. Bloke just likes fighting. He's also very good at it. Always evaded being pinned for anything he ever did. Wouldn't be surprised if he killed a man or two before. Fortunately for me, he's friendly to my family. Just don't owe him money. My sibling. Kind as can be. Warm. Friendly. Immaculate home. Gives hugs to strangers. Handshakes everyone. Borderline social butterfly. Never been in trouble with law enforcement. Is high-level IT at a financial institution. Finances are in good order. Helps out the rest of us when we're in a bind. Is a studious gun owner. Who takes safety to a serious level. Doesn't drink. Doesn't smoke. Works on classic cars. Smart. Very smart. Great storyteller. If he wasn't so damn tall, he'd probably be elsewise fairly unremarkable. He used to work for Blackwater in the mid-2000s. Did something related to human intelligence and handling local leaders. I met a few of his old coworkers incidentally about 3 years ago. Thoughtful. Skilled. Former special ops. The kind of guys who make $150K per year doing private security for ultra-rich people. Not the loud ones at the bar showing off their old dog tags and tattoos. Some of them visibly responded when I said my brother's name. Most wouldn't talk about their past at all. The two who did told me that sometimes people just need to be killed to stop them from doing really bad things. And sometimes that person needs to be made into a message for others. I learned my brother was the one they could rely on to send the message. The local warlords, I guess they were loosely Taliban flavored? Apparently it's not black and white over there. Were delivered a message in the form of death on one hand with a promise of more. And a peace gift in the other. To never interfere with their teams in the area again. And those locals accepted the deal without questioning it. I asked my brother about it and all he said was he'll have to stand in judgment for the things he did when his time comes. And he's okay with that. Well, Danger is my middle name, so. You know those people you hear about who are shut in and don't go out. Don't interact with anyone. And are radicalized on political issues within the US and do down the rabbit holes of conspiracy theories and are ready to go guns a-blazing against anyone who is against them. Yeah. Recently learned a family member was said person as well. Haven't seen them in 5 years and I dunno what the fuck happened. I am in the unique position of having met every serial killer that has been caught in the state in the last 50+ years. Except the Moser recent one. Honestly, it's not one of them. It is a serial rapist who refuses all mental health diagnosis. I am absolutely certain that he has a body count nobody knows about. Fortunately, he is a cardiac patient in his mid-60s who intentionally causes cardiac distress to himself, and the likelihood that he will survive to his late 80s to be released is low. I think it much more likely that he will escape during a hospital trip that he engineered. Likely with the assistance of his family. Which are just as bad as he is. He has already manipulated staff into security lapses a few times. So it is coming. Hopefully they will just kill him during the attempt. But we will never be that lucky. The homeless guy that chased me with a knife in his hand today. The answer was right above this post. My second cousin. He's in his 60s now. Quiet family man. Really pleasant guy. Doesn't say much. He's also built like a brick shithouse. And was an active member of a particularly nasty gang in NZ for a long time. He left that gang the hard way. Mr. Wick. I once saw him kill 3 men in a bar. With a pencil. A foo asterisk kin pencil. People in the military who have promoted way past their level of competence. Who are then in charge in combat situations. Nothing worse than being under fire and realizing the guy in charge hasn't got a fucking clue. My father-in-law carries a gun everywhere. He's also so feeble. He can barely hold it up. I asked him to store it in my gun locker when he was at my house. And he tried to eject the magazine and then racked the slide to eject the cartridge that's always loaded. And he really struggled to pull the slide back. I thought he was going to shoot himself trying to eject that cartridge. He also pointed it at someone who was yelling at him at a gas station because he's never been in a fistfight. And is basically terrified someone might do anything violent since he's too weak to pick up a car battery. I had to help. He's going to kill someone. My cousin's husband is a pilot in the military and is constantly in missions that he can't talk about to anyone. Even his wife or colleagues. I can only imagine what they are. He can say though that he fairly regularly goes to the Pentagon. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to drop a like. If you would like to see more content like this in the future, subscribe and turn on notifications to be notified about future videos. Now check out one of these interesting videos.